in person. I want to thank Senator Paul for his help in accommodating this hearing. This is an extremely important hearing, our first with administration witnesses in regards to our responsibility to oversight the small business tools that have been made available as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's hearing will give us an opportunity to look back on SBA's implementation of its COVID-19 relief programs in the past year. It gives us an opportunity to look ahead at how SBA intends to help small businesses get through the remainder of the pandemic. Saturday, March 27th, 3 days from now, will mark 1 year since the CARES Act was enacted. Congress knew that the public health restrictions on public gatherings needed to protect our communities from virus would be challenging for small businesses. So we had to provide them with unprecedented relief. This is because small businesses are not as resilient to economic disruption as large corporations due to their razor-thin profits margins and low cash reserves. SBA already administers the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which provides small businesses harmed by natural disasters with low-interest, long-term capital. But we knew the agency would need additional tools in its toolkit to meet the scale of the pandemic. So the CARES Act created the Paycheck Protection Program to provide forgivable loans to help small businesses keep their employees on payroll and keep their doors open. It created the Small Business Debt Relief Program, initially proposed by Senator Coons and me to cover monthly payments on new and existing traditional SBA loans. I further pushed for inclusion in the EIDL Advanced Grant Program to provide $10,000 grants to small businesses owners who apply for EIDL loans. In the years since the programs have been up and running, Congress has appropriated more than $1 trillion to the SBA for COVID-19 relief. And the SBA staff has worked nights and weekends to deliver more than $900 billion of that aid to small businesses. SBA has approved more than 8.2 million PPP loans worth more than $718 billion and has approved more than 3.7 million EIDL loans worth more than $200 billion. These programs have literally saved small businesses that otherwise would have been shuttered for good that are still viable in our community. It also saved the stress on the unemployment insurance system by keeping employees of small businesses on the payroll rather than collecting unemployment insurance. It also allowed small businesses to maintain their workforce. We've had hearings in this committee before COVID-19 as to the challenges of small businesses finding the workforce that they need. If they would have lost workforce because of this pandemic, to be able to get that workforce put back together again so the small business would be viable at full potential when the pandemic was over was much less possible. So these programs have been extremely important to preserve the small business network in our economy, which is critical to economic growth, innovation, and job growth. In that time, we have learned many lessons that have helped us fine-tune these programs. Days after the launch of PPP, small businesses in Black, Latino, Native, Asian, rural, and other underbanked communities began to raise the alarm about access to the program. Senator Shaheen and I were concerned about this as we wrote the CARES Act, so we put a provision in the bill that required the SBA issue guidance to banks participating in PPP to prioritize loan applications for underserved small businesses. Unfortunately, SBA did not do that, which led the SBA Inspector General, Mike Ware, who is with us today, to issue a report that found that the SBA's implementation of the PPP did not fully align with congressional intent in the CARES Act. That is why Senate Democrats have pushed for the inclusion of specific set-asides for PPP for borrowers from underbanked communities in the COVID-19 relief bills that have passed since the CARES Act. When Congress replenished the PPP funds in April of last year, we secured $60 billion set aside for mission lenders, such as CDFIs, which have demonstrated history of getting capital into the hands of underbanked entrepreneurs. Then we secured another $15 billion set aside for mission lenders, as well as a $60 billion set aside for the smallest small businesses with fewer than 10 employees in the bipartisan Economic Aid Act that passed in December. Data on this current round of PPP indicate that these changes have been effective. The share of funds to small businesses with fewer than 10 employees has gone up nearly 60%. The share of funds to small businesses in rural communities has gone up nearly 30%. And the share of funds distributed to CDFIs and MDIs has gone up more than 40%. I was very proud last month when the Biden administration built on this success by implementing changes to the PPP to make it a more equitable program, including a 14-day window during which only small businesses with fewer than 20 employees could apply to the program. During the exclusivity period, SBA approved more than 400,000 loans, and nearly 200,000 were first-time borrowers. We're reaching the harder to serve and most needy small businesses. The promising loan data underscores the urgent need to extend the PPP to take full advantage of our momentum. Recognize it's now a different standard for self-employed. Makes it more worthwhile for them to apply. We have additional eligibilities, and it's difficult for some communities to find a lender. They need the time. Last week, the House passed the bipartisan PPP Extension Act by a vote of 415-3. That bill extended the March 31st deadline by 2 months to May 31st, then gave the SBA until June 30 to process any backlog applications. I introduced companion legislation here in the Senate with Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen. And I'm urging all my colleagues to support this clean extension. We need to do that this week before we leave. Otherwise, the program will be closed. We are going to look at improvements in the program, and we'll do that in a bipartisan way, as we always have. I'm looking forward to learning more from our witnesses about how these measures are helping our most vulnerable small businesses access PPP. I am also looking forward to discussing SBA's implementation of EIDL and EIDL Advanced Grants programs. As I've expressed before, we were disappointed by the cap put on by the Trump administration of $150,000 for the EIDL loans, and there's been bipartisan efforts in the Senate by Senator Rosen and Senator Cornyn to correct that. I was disappointed by the administration's decision to provide EIDL applicants only $1,000 on the EIDL Advance per employee, up to 10 employees, instead of the full $10,000. That is why the economic aid created in the targeted EIDL Advance Grant Program provides full $10,000 grants to small businesses located in low-income communities that were underfunded due to the $1,000 per employee rule. This program is critical to the health of our most vulnerable small businesses that need help but unable to take out additional loans. I'm eager to hear from the SBA the progress that has been made in implementing the program. We will also discuss how SBA intends to ensure the shuttered venue operators' grants are distributed swiftly and equitably to help as many of our vital cultural institutions as possible. I was very pleased to hear the SBA is going to be accepting applications on April the 8th. And we will discuss SBA plans for implementing the programs created by the Historic American Rescue Plan, including the $28.6 billion grant program for restaurants and bars and the Community Navigator Pilot Program, as well as the agency's progress in implementing the Inspector General and Government Accountability Office's recommendations to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse in these vital programs. For the first time in a year, Americans can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. So in the coming months, SBA must continue to be a lifeline for American small businesses. Once again, I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this hearing. We look forward to a robust discussion. And with that, I will turn it to the ranking member, Senator Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome everyone on our panel today. Today's hearing is the first of what I hope will be an ongoing effort by the committee to conduct meaningful oversight over SBA's COVID-19 relief programs. As I've said before, I supported Administrator Guzman's confirmation to the SBA as a good faith effort to work with the administration. A good faith effort, I hope, will include SBA providing my office with the programmatic data and information necessary to adequately evaluate the agency's implementation of the PPP and EIDL programs. That request has been put in writing to the SBA. Now that Administrator Guzman has been sworn in, I hope to begin to see improvements in the transparency so that Congress can properly evaluate SBA's programs. What we do know is that Washington has spent over $1 trillion on small businesses relief, yet Thousands of small businesses have permanently closed throughout the country due to Orwellian lockdowns and capacity restrictions. Meanwhile, the SBA's COVID-19 emergency programs have been rife with fraud. The SBA Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have released report after report with startling revelations on the lack of internal controls at SBA. SBA has never been equipped to handle grants and loans at this volume, nor should they be. The Inspector General, Department of Justice, and the Government Accountability Office have only scratched the surface on waste and fraud and improper payments and ineligible entities obtaining funding through the Paycheck Protection Program and EIDL programs. In one case, brought by the DOJ, conspirators fraudulently applied for close to 90 PPP loans worth over $24 million. At least 42 of these fraudulent PPP loans were approved and funded for approximately $17.4 million. On top of this, KPMG, as looking at the audits, has discovered that KPMG could not successfully have completed SBA's yearly audit due to several financial control weaknesses and missing information. Despite all of this, evidence of rampant abuse within its programs, SBA is yet to conduct a formal fraud risk assessment for either the PPP or EIDL programs. So 11 months and 25 days since these programs were signed into law, and SBA has not even assessed the fraud risks of either program. While that is not required by law, GAO has recommended the agency do this, and I think the American taxpayers expect for this basic due diligence. Meanwhile, the administration is requesting an extension of the PPP program to a new class of eligible entities. When my colleagues on the other side of the aisle discuss small business relief, they often tout bipartisanship. We have seen the PPP and EIDL programs funded multiple times on bipartisan basis, but let's not forget that just a few weeks ago, a entirely partisan $1.9 trillion package that expanded PPP to new class of entities despite abundant evidence that the pandemic is waning. As we all know, PPP will expire on March 31st. If Congress is going to continue to extend this program, let's at least be honest to the taxpayer about who is going to benefit. The truth is that the majority used a partisan reconciliation process to change the program to benefit large nonprofits and labor unions. Extending the program would also continue to provide incentives for states and local politicians to keep restrictions on our businesses and the economy. As we saw in the last week's Small Business Committee hearing, the unintended consequences of the lockdowns and the unseen consequences of policy decisions are large and tangible. The time to reopen our economy is now. The Paycheck Protection Program served its purpose of emergency relief, and now our relief efforts need to look different as the country begins to open and people resume their lives. I look forward to hearing from our government panel today and receiving an update on where the programs stand.
Thank you, Senator Paul. We will now go to our witnesses. Your entire statements will be made part of our record. We ask that you try to summarize your comments in 5 minutes or so. We'll first hear from Patrick Kelly, who is the Associate Administrator for the Office of Capital Assessment at SBA. He was the Deputy Chief of Staff for SBA under the Obama administration, as well as the Deputy Associate Administrator of OCA. Next, we'll hear from James Rivera, who was named the Associate Administrator for SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance in November 2009. Mr. Rivera has also served as Deputy Associate Administrator of the office and was instrumental in leading several efforts to improve the agency's disaster operations after Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. Mr. Rivera started his SBA career in 1989 as a disaster loan specialist in Fort Worth, Texas. Mike Ware was sworn in as Inspector General in 2018. Following his confirmation by the United States Senate, he was responsible for independent oversight of the SBA programs and operations. He's also a statutory member of the Council of Inspector Generals on Integrity and Efficiency, Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, serving alongside with his Inspector General colleagues to provide a whole-of-government response to the pandemic oversight. And our fourth witness will be Bill Scher, is Director of GAO's Financial Markets and Community Investment Team. Mr. Scher leads substantial bodies at the GAO work addressing the Small Business Administration, community and economic development programs, and Native American housing issues. We'll start with Mr. Kelly.
Good afternoon, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and the members of the committee, Administrator Guzman, and I thank you for your strong support of the agency's Paycheck Protection Program and all of the SBA's programs. Beginning this month, I serve as the Associate Administrator for the Office of Capital Access. I'm humbled by this opportunity to serve with Capital Access civil servants who have worked tirelessly to provide relief to small businesses. Today, I look forward to discussing PPP, oversight, forgiveness, debt relief, and any other topics that the members of this committee deem of interest. By way of update of PPP, in 2020, the SBA approved a total of 5.2 million loans for $522 billion. And of course, as Chairman mentioned, the Economic Aid Act extended the authority to make PPP loans through March 31st, 2021, with an additional $284 billion. And the American Rescue Plan Act provided an additional $7.2 billion. In this latest round of PPP, as of March 21st, the SBA has approved 3.1 million loans, totaling roughly $196 billion, with approximately $79 billion in lending authority remaining. And as the committee knows, without congressional action, the program is set to expire on March 31st. And the administration supports extending PPP through May 31st and allowing pending applications to be processed through June 30th. While the agency did a tremendous job of getting money out the door, some have reasonably argued that in doing so, the PPP program lacked eligibility and fraud checks on potential borrowers and therefore might have increased the instances of potential fraud, waste, and abuse. This is a reasonable critique, and one the agency takes very seriously. We also commend my colleagues on the panel from the Office of the Inspector General and the General Accountability Office for working tirelessly to help the agency address this. As a result, the Office of Capital Access has developed a detailed loan review plan. The process is designed to maximize program integrity and optimize the use of SBA's loan review resources while considering the challenges posed by the high volume of PPP loans and the statutory time frame for remittance of forgiveness payments. As part of this process, in late 2020, the SBA reviewed the entire portfolio of PPP loans through the use of an automated screening process, comparing loan data with publicly available information and applying eligibility and fraud detection rules consistent with GAO's best practices and commercial sector best practices of same. Additionally, this round of PPP loan approval is now contingent on passing front-end SBA compliance checks during the application process. SBA will continue to improve the compliance check resolution process, such as addressing lender certification process challenges, analyzing historical data associated with case reviews and disposition, and deploying best practice fraud detection tools consistent with GAO and private sector best practices. While working diligently to approve new PPP loans and standing up a robust risk management control framework, Cap Access has also been processing forgiveness. To date, we have processed roughly 40% of the 2020 forgiveness applications, and Administrator Guzman is pleased to share that greater than 99% received full forgiveness. This is an important trend line because the bipartisan PPP program told America's small businesses, if you seek this relief, you will be forgiven, provided you apply 60% to payroll and 40% to other eligible non-payroll costs. America's small businesses are doing their part. Another absolutely critical part of the CARES Act created the debt relief program, also referred to as Section 1112 payments, to provide 6 months of principal, interest, and fee payments on pre-existing and new SBA 7A, 504, and microloans. These payments provided critical economic stability for hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Finally, the Economic Aid Act also included $1.9 billion to carry out changes to the SBA's two largest programs, 7A and 504, including but not limited to temporarily waiving fees on borrowers and lenders and increasing the guarantee on 7A loans. In closing, I am incredibly grateful for the tremendous amount of work by the CAPAX's staff, delivering over billions in PPP relief would not, however, have been possible without the partnership of over 5,000 lenders, and Administrator Guzman and I are extremely grateful for all of their hard work and dedication in executing this program with us. I'd also like to thank the members of this committee for your support of the agency and for your dedication to America's small businesses. I will put my whole soul into our efforts to help America's small businesses, and am looking forward to addressing members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, and we very much appreciate your service. Mr. Rivera?
Good afternoon, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss SBA's Disaster Assistance Loan Program and other relief programs in response to COVID pandemic. My name is James Rivera. I'm the Associate Administrator in SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance, and on behalf of the new Administrator, Isabel Guzman, and the entire agency, I want to start by thanking you for your strong support of the agency's disaster assistance mission and your continued leadership to ensure that as a country, we can meet the challenges of multiple disaster events and the global pandemic affecting the United States and its U.S. territories. Let me take this opportunity to outline the work SBA is doing and report our progress regarding the EIDL program during the COVID pandemic. Since SBA's inception in 1953, and leading up to COVID, SBA has approved over 2.2 million disaster loans for $67 billion to disaster survivors. And with the two largest disasters, Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma in 2005, we approved over $11 billion. And for Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria in 2017, we approved $7.4 billion. As of yesterday, we've approved over 3.7 million COVID EIDL loans for over $202 billion. Over this past year, the agency has approved and dispersed 3 times as many EIDL loans for COVID as we have in the past 68 years. And we continue to approve $400 to $500 million a week in COVID lending. Since June, the average processing time for all COVID EIDL applications has been just under 17 days. We have approximately $270 billion in loan authority for the COVID EIDL lending. In May 2020, the previous administration implemented a policy to size economic injury disaster loan assistance to 6 months of economic injury and with the maximum of $150,000. Administrator Guzman has approved an increase in loan eligibility to 24 months of economic injury with a maximum of $500,000. We are planning to implement the new policy by the first week of April. Administrator Guzman has also wants me to develop a plan to increase the loan limit up to the statutory limit of $2 million as soon as possible. This will take additional time to upgrade our system to secure loans over $500,000 using real estate collateral. Earlier this month, SBA announced that we will extend deferments of all disaster loan payments until 2022. In additional loan activity, we've processed over 5.8 million EIDL Advance emergency grants for $20 billion. The EIDL Advance program funds were exhausted on July 10th of 2020. As you know, in December, the targeted EIDL Advance was initially authorized and appropriated for $20 billion, and the American Rescue Plan added another $10 billion, bringing the total appropriation to $30 billion. On February 1st, we began sending email invites to businesses in the first priority group. To date, we've invited more than 3.7 million businesses to apply for targeted EIDL Advance. We've received more than 500,000 applications, and we're starting to approve over $10 million in applications this week. Our focus will shift to incorporate the supplemental target EIDL Advance payments of $5,000 for the hardest hit areas that are in a low-income community. Another relief program created by the Consolidated Act of 2021 is the Shuttered Venues program. It was authorized for $15 billion and will provide grants to live venue operators, independent movie theaters, cultural institutions, and other eligible entities. Last week, we launched a new landing page for this program, and we announced that we plan to begin accepting applications on April the 8th. We will be holding an informational session on March the 30th for potential applicants. That is a requirement for the grant program. To date, we've received over 18 million applications for a COVID-19 EIDL program. To meet the incredible demand, I want to express my appreciation for ODA's remarkable and hardworking staff who are endlessly committed to supporting businesses and business owners throughout the difficult times. Thank you again, Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera, particularly for that announcement in regards to the EIDL program, EIDL loan program. Mike Ware, Mr. Ware.
Got it. Thank you, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and distinguished members of the committee for inviting me to speak with you today and for your continued support of my office. I come before you today in the midst of a historic challenge to the nation, a challenge for which the SBA has a pivotal and unprecedented role in stabilizing the U.S. economy. The men and women of my office have been working diligently to provide oversight of SBA's pandemic response. I am always proud to represent them publicly and to speak to you about our important work. We share in the nation's grief for those lost to the pandemic and are keenly aware that nothing short of the public's trust is at stake in our oversight efforts. SBA is managing over $1 trillion in lending authority through the PPP and the EIDL programs, with the most recent tranche of lending authority being contained within the American Rescue Plan Act. As with our office, the men and women of SBA have been running at a sprinter's pace. However, the race we are running has been a marathon. Nonetheless, we have sought to have an aggressive and focused approach to our oversight to ensure our work is properly calibrated and relevant. The Congress recognized that the oversight required of the pandemic response was outsized for our office. For the oversight recognized of the pandemic response, to include my office across government. And we have received 3 supplemental appropriations to increase our oversight capacity. Initially, we focused on the recruitment of a mix of auditors, analysts, and criminal investigators to provide immediate and timely insight into these programs. Then in December, we received funding directed to oversight of the EIDL program that seeks to address the rampant fraud identified by my office. Those funds are being used to increase our investigative staff and enhance our data analysis capacity. We received our most recent supplemental increase a couple of weeks ago, and those funds will be used to further increase our investigative capacity to combat fraud. Fraud investigations will be a decade-long effort due to the performance of those loans within SBA's portfolios and the statute of limitations for fraud. Our office will have approximately 40% more staff on board after our hiring surges for EIDL and ARPA conclude than we had before March 2020. Even still, we recognize from the beginning that the level of oversight required would take a whole-of-government approach. We partner with law enforcement entities across government and join multiple task forces to multiply our reach. Since the outset of the pandemic response, our strategy has been to prevent and deter fraud, waste, and abuse, and to identify and combat instances of the same. The first step was the issuance of 3 reports sharing risks and lessons learned from our past oversight work, principally that most closely related, which is of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. These reports, as well as a fraud and scam alert, were published before SBA made the first PPP and EIDL loans. Recognizing the speed at which lending was occurring in both these programs, we developed innovative report products to provide timely insight to our stakeholders. Our first flash report was published just a little over 30 days of PPP's implementation. Our next report would come out in July, which found significant deficiencies in internal controls and rampant fraud within the EIDL program. We have issued 11 reports on SBA's PPP and EIDL programs to date, with 2 more near issuance. While our audit work was ongoing, our criminal investigators were aggressively pursuing fraud. On May 5th of last year, just a little over a month after the first PPP loans, the first in the nation fraud charges were announced against an individual fraudulently seeking a PPP loan. We have since initiated over 420 investigations, and together with our law enforcement partners, the Department of Justice has announced over 100 charges against individuals committing fraud against the PPP and EIDL programs. Our investigative efforts have resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in loan disbursements being returned or seized. We have received nearly 150,000 complaints on our hotline since March of last year. This is over 150 years worth of complaints when compared to prior years. We have sought and obtained assistance from the PRAC to catalog complaints being received outside of our online complaint submission system. And as we continue to address our processing backlog, we are employing data analytics to further triage and guide these efforts. I look forward to discussing our most recent public work surrounding implementation of PPP and EIDL, but I must tell you that data analytics has made a difference in our office's ability to keep our stakeholders currently and fully informed in a timely manner. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am happy to answer any questions you may have of me.
Thank you, Mr. Ware, for your service. We appreciate it very much. We'll now hear from Mr. Scher from the GAO.
Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our work on SBA's Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. SBA has made or guaranteed more than 17 million loans and grants, providing about $910 billion to help small businesses adversely affected by COVID-19. Over time, we have found the following. First, with respect to PPP oversight, given an immediate need for PPP loans, SBA implemented limited safeguards for approving PPP loans. Because ongoing oversight is crucial, we recommended in June 2020 that SBA develop plans to assess PPP risk. SBA has since developed plans to review PPP loans and has recently provided us detailed information about its oversight process. Second, analysis of EIDL data. We reported in January 2021 that SBA had provided about 5,000 advances totaling about $26 million and approved at least 3,000 loans totaling about $156 million to potentially ineligible businesses. Therefore, we recommended that SBA conduct portfolio-level analysis to detect potentially ineligible applications. Next, assessment of fraud risk. Although SBA has taken some steps to mitigate fraud risk to PPP and EIDL, such as conducting PPP loan reviews and implementing new EIDL controls, the agency has not yet conducted a formal fraud risk assessment for either program. Next, suspicious activity reports. From April through October 2020, financial institutions filed more than 21,000 suspicious activity reports related to PPP. From May through October 2020, financial institutions filed more than 20,000 such reports related to EIDL. Moving on to Department of Justice charges. From May 2020 through February 2021, the Department of Justice publicly announced charges in over 100 fraud-related cases associated with PPP loans and 30 fraud-related cases associated with EIDL loans. We have just heard from the Inspector General, and I'll point to his report in October 2020 that its initial review of EIDL revealed strong indicators of widespread potential fraud in the program. I'll now move to the financial statement audit. In December 2020, SBA's independent financial statement auditor issued a disclaimer of opinion on SBA's fiscal year 2020 consolidated financial statements because SBA could not provide adequate documentation to support a significant number of transactions and account balances related to PPP and EIDL. Since June 2020, we have reported on the potential for fraud in both PPP and EIDL. Further, as we have reported multiple times, SBA's failure to provide us with data and documentation on PPP and EIDL in a timely manner has impeded our efforts to ensure transparency and accountability for the programs. This includes delays in our obtaining key information from SBA, such as detailed oversight plans and documentation for estimating improper payments. Results of SBA's most recent financial statement audit are consistent with our findings. As a result, we included these programs as a new area on our high-risk list in March 2021 because of their potential for fraud, significant program integrity risk, and need for much improved program management and better oversight. According to federal internal control standards and our fraud risk framework, managers and executive branch agencies are responsible for managing fraud risk and implementing practices for mitigating those risks. When fraud risk can be identified and mitigated, fraud may be less likely to occur. Risk management is a formal and disciplined practice for addressing risk and reducing it to an acceptable level. In addition to our previous recommendations, we anticipate making 4 recommendations on fraud risk in PPP and EIDL and 1 on EIDL oversight in our March 2021 report to be issued next week on the federal COVID-19 response. SBA agreed with the recommendations, stating it would implement fraud risk assessments for both programs and an oversight plan for EIDL. This concludes my statement. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your comments and for your work. I want to first start again by thanking you for your service, and please express our committee's appreciation to the staff that have worked at the SBA implementing an unprecedented increase in your responsibilities. Unbelievable amount of additional work that was required to be done in a short period of time. And we thank very much the workers at the SBA for handling that, and the oversight agencies, whether it be the Inspector General or GAO. These are unprecedented responsibilities that have been thrust upon you. So thank you to you and your staff. And I appreciate the update. It was good to hear the adjustments you're making in the EIDL loan program. As I understand it, you're going to increase by 4 the size of the EIDL loans, basing it on 24 months rather than 6 months, which is realistic considering the damage done by COVID-19. And you're going to increase the cap initially from 150 to 500,000 and looking at taking it up to the full 2 million. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Senator Rosen and Senator Cornyn introduced bipartisan legislation to get that done, which had the support of many of us on this committee. So I'm pleased to see that we are now moving in that direction. I also appreciate the update in regards to the EIDL Advance program, that there's applications now being received. These are our most vulnerable small businesses, so I'm pleased to see that that is in the works. As I understand it, you'll be having the informational session on March 30th on the shuttered venue program, and that window will open up in April, beginning of April. That's also good news. You didn't mention the restaurant and bar program, which I assume will follow shortly after the shuttered venue program. But do we have any indication as to a time schedule as to when the applications or information will be made available in regards to the restaurant and bars? I guess that would be to, I don't know if it's Mr. Rivera or Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. We're currently looking at that recent legislation, and we'll get a response to you immediately. There's been some internal discussions on what's the best platform to use and how can we do it most expeditiously considering all these other programs. But we have a good plan, and we'll be reaching out to you. We can ask the administrator, or Patrick or myself can reach out to you.
I appreciate you keep us
the next week or two.
If you'll keep us informed, then we do appreciate the information on the shuttered venue. We would hope that the restaurants would be a similar platform that perhaps would not quite take as long to get that information out. I noticed that you support the extension of the PPP program in the legislation that passed the House that will be considered later this week in the Senate. Can you give us an estimate as to how much will be remaining in PPP authorization and appropriation at the end of this month?
Yes. So the latest trend line has about 79 billion of program level left, which puts us on pace for in the current trend lines somewhere around mid to late April in terms of funds being potentially all used up. So obviously that funding will not be used up by March 31st, but with an extension, we believe that it will be used.
Well, that's helpful. It means we can extend it, but we should urge those eligible businesses to follow as quickly as possible so they don't get shut out because the lack of funds, which happened in the EIDL Advance program. So we will get that message across. As you know, the Biden administration announced a number of changes in the program to increase the relief for sole proprietors. using a different calculation known as the Schedule C form. We've had interest as to that being made retroactive, certainly for the second round of PPP. We've also had concern that the business structure that you allow for this calculation does not take into consideration business structures that are used by some self-employed individuals, such as partnership forms. Will you work with us as we try to make sure that that change, which we support, is equitably applied to all similar type of small businesses?
Yes, we will work with the committee on that. Yes.
I don't think it's going to be a large sum of money, but it's just not right for somebody who filed their application early not to be able to get the advantage of it, or if they're using a legal structure, which is normal, and not to qualify if they otherwise would qualify as a small business. So we hope we could get those two issues resolved moving forward. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Paul.
Mr. Kelly, since the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program last April, 38 Planned Parenthood affiliates applied for and received $80 million in taxpayer funds meant for small business relief. Pursuant to the longstanding affiliation rules, which stipulate that affiliated organizations are to be considered as one organization, SBA found and concluded that the Planned Parenthood was ineligible for PPP funds and sent letters to each of the 38 organizations who wrongfully received funds and asked for the money back. Despite nearly 2 months of waiting, the SBA provided updated PPP data to this committee only yesterday morning, just one day before this hearing. While combing through this data, though, we find that while 7 affiliates did return their funds last year, the rest fraudulently, at least according to the SBA determination, received the full amount requested. This includes 2 Planned Parenthood organizations who have recently received a second draw loan, each within the last month. These approvals come long after the SBA sent letters concluding that the Planned Parenthood affiliates clearly were ineligible for the first draw of PPP and should return any funding they received. In your testimony today, you said that you place holds on people who were ineligible the first time, and that's supposed to protect and prevent them from getting a second draw. Mr. Chairman, I asked for consent to enter 2 letters from the SBA into the record on their determination of Planned Parenthood affiliates being ineligible. Without objection. My question, Mr. Kelly, is has the Biden SBA reversed the long-standing application of affiliation rules in an effort to make Planned Parenthood eligible for first and second draw loans? And how do you explain giving second draw loans to organizations that were initially told they were ineligible for first?
So the first answer is no. To your first question, no, we are not changing any rules related to affiliation. And with respect to the issue on the 2 loans, I'll have to get back to you on the specific instances with your committee, because obviously with over 8 million loans in the PPP portfolio, there's a lot to consider. I will say in reference to any loans that are received a second draw, there was a hold population created in the fall of 2020 by the agency under the previous administration. Those hold codes do include affiliation designations. And so without knowing more about the particular instances of the individual loans, I can't really speak to that. But I can assure you that we are following the affiliation law and will do so.
I guess my point is that there really is a significant contradiction here between people being ruled ineligible and then getting a second draw. So we really would like a very specific answer. How did 2 organizations get a second draw when they were determined to be ineligible to begin with? Because in your testimony, you did say there is a process for those ineligible to then be targeted so they can't get a second draw if we've already told them they weren't eligible for the first draw. Mr. Ware, have you conducted an investigation into the history of Planned Parenthood's access to PPP loans, particularly after the May 19th letters were sent from the Small Business Administration?
Thank you. So we are definitely aware of the concerns by you and other members of Congress regarding Planned Parenthood. As noted in our 2021 oversight plan, we intend to focus on the eligibility of loans made under PPP as a series. And regardless of the scope of that series of reviews, we will audit to the criteria relative to eligibility determinations. To date, we have not done a specific look into Planned Parenthood, but what I'm saying is that we have a whole series in terms of eligibility in which it would more likely be covered.
Well, what we'd like to do is to send this information to you that we've found of 2 of the Planned Parenthood groups getting loans a second time when they were told they were ineligible the first time, which would seem to contradict the rules that we have in place. And I hope that we can get a written response from you on that.
You will. Thank you.
Mr. Scheer, you noted in your testimony that the SBA has yet to conduct a formal fraud risk assessment of the PPP and EIDL programs. In your view, would it be irresponsible for Congress to extend these deadlines without actually having a fraud risk assessment in place?
You raise a very good question, and it's a question that really, there's a lot of trade-offs involved. There's the question of, so let me just take eligible borrowers who have played by the rules of the program and have been affected adversely by the pandemic. And the question for those borrowers, in cases where you could say we look for flags, like with data analytics, with other methods, we look for flags that could be flags for potential fraud. And the idea is for those where no flags appear, it's the question of, do you really want to stop assistance from this program to those where there aren't any flags that are being raised? There's also categories of borrowers where there might be certain flags that are raised by SBA's contractors' automated system, where they might be issues where it could be as simple as a social security number or an employee identification number being off by a digit and raising a flag. And then you have those flags that are multiple flags that might point to a higher likelihood of fraud. So there's trade-offs here, but the question there becomes one of stopping a program because the fraud risk framework and really an approach to fraud that tries to parse out and say, what, in a formal way, what is the risk of fraud in the program and what are the biggest areas where there is that risk of fraud, and the agency coming to a determination of what its fraud appetite is in terms of just having a strategy for dealing with potential fraud. So I would point to the trade-offs involved and really to our fraud framework to begin with, which takes into account how can you make a program effective without unduly raising fraud risk.
Senator Cantwell.
Mr. Chairman, is Senator Shaheen next?
We've been using the seniority because of the WebEx. If you
Okay. Go ahead. Okay, thank you. I wanted to follow up on the chairman's comments. You covered several things, but I want to go back to the Restaurant Revitalization Grant Program. It's $28 billion, and restaurants across the United States have been really impacted. More than 2,300 have closed in my state since the pandemic. And, famous chefs like Tom Douglas, who's a James Beard award-winning chef, helped really make Seattle a destination with many restaurants. He's gone from 850 employees down to 65. As of March, only 3 of his 13 restaurants are still open. So obviously, we have Tony Brown in Spokane, been featured on the Food Network. He went from 44 employees down to 11 employees, lost the majority of his revenue. So this is a story throughout the state of Washington, Mr. Rivera, and I wanted to get back to the basics of the application program. Since SBA is juggling a lot of different issues, I want to understand the time frame here. I know you mentioned to the chair platform and making sure the right platform, but with the large volume of grant applications, in addition to the other grant applications that you're talking about for IDLE and the music venue, what additional personnel or technology or resources or responsibilities do we need to have to get this program underway? What else does SBA need?
Patrick, do you want to take this question or you want me to pick it up?
Yeah, sure, James. I'll take this. Senator Cantwell, thank you for your question. I think first off, the Congress should feel really good about the statutory language that you've given us to authorize this program. So, for example, one of the limitations for a program of this scale and size could have been the requirement of using sam.gov. But as you know, the statutory authorizing language speaks to giving the agency the discretion to seek unique identifiers that the industry uses. So in the case of restaurants, that would be EIN, Social Security, ITIN numbers. So that's an important aspect of it. And that's really important because sam.gov services 57,000 roughly entities. And it's scheduled for maintenance in April. And so having that latitude to design a unique instance with the industry sector unique identifiers was a really important step. The second thing that I think the committee did, which is consistent with what the Congress has done in this round of PPP that's important, is giving prioritization to women-owned, veteran, and social and economically disadvantaged restaurants with a priority period, emphasizing the smallest of the small businesses with the 500,000 in sales. From a technology perspective, one of the great things about what Mr. Scheer spoke to and what Mr. Ware spoke to with respect to leveraging data analytics to know your customer, to identify individuals, to identify business owners, leveraging LexisNexis public records database, D&B databases, and so forth, gives us the ability to create a platform that's scalable, can offer a web application for folks to apply, to leverage the SBA's network of affiliated entities, such as our district offices, but also to architect an application program interface, which will allow for intermediaries similar to the PPP program, like point of sale vendors that restaurants use.
Okay, I've heard enough. Thank you. I think, listen, I understand the complexity here. I worked in software for 5 years, but what I'm really want to get down to is the brass tacks here. Are we talking weeks? Are we talking a month? Are we talking at the, by April 15th? What are we talking? I think restaurants who've been hanging on, they need to know. They need to know when they will be able to apply, and when do you think you'll get the money out the door. So we're not tying you to forever and ever, but it's just, we think this long to get our application up and running. We think this long to get the money out the door. We're already hearing great stories from our constituents about, oh my gosh, thank you for getting those checks. They've arrived. Thank you. It was a lifeline. So the restaurants, which we in previous bills hadn't been able to secure the kind of help and support. Now we have it, but we have to realize they've been in the queue for a long, long time. So they need to know this information. Are we talking about, by April 15th, or what are we talking about?
Yes. So what we're trying to do is stand up the program as quickly as possible. And as you know from technology projects, things are hard and can slide to the right. But right now we're targeting beginning a phased launch in April, provided we can work with our partners at OMB to scale the platform in a way that allows us to leverage ecosystem partners like point of sale vendors, as well as allowing folks to apply directly.
And
so,
when the money, how soon would the money then go out after that? My time is
so the idea would be in the next 7 to 10 days to start posting information relevant to the applicants and to give guidance on application and supporting documentation, similar to what's being done James spoke to on shuttered venues beginning this week. And then we would move to the prioritization pilot phase, and then to a broader open following that phase. And so that would typically unfurl over 30 to 45 days, where you would have the prioritization entities coming into the instance and dispersing funds, and then opening it more broadly to the
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, but I'm just saying, okay, maybe after COVID, we'll have this very lucid conversation about the government and how fast. And to me, some of our colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, have made this point. Help states update their systems. It's not like software updating of states would be a bad idea after this experience, because now we see we're gated. We're gated on everything that we want to do. And we need to figure out how to be more successful at getting these things set up quickly and out the door, albeit, yes, making sure that the right people are applying. So anyway, I would encourage you to sharpen the answer up about once the platform is established and the request is in, what that turnaround time on a check is, because I think your answer was getting a little elongated. We're not trying to trick you. We're just trying to tell people who are holding on, restaurants who are holding on or who've been trying to figure this out, what their time frame really looks like before they might actually see financial help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I sort of want to underscore Senator Cantwell's point. For many restaurants and bars, this is, they're holding on by a thread right now. And I know we've tried to help. We made it a little bit easier for them to qualify for PPP, and then we gave them a more generous second round of PPP. But they're desperate, and I understand the priorities that Congress set that. We want to make sure that's done. And I also want to compliment the SBA, because you've been keeping us informed as you are rolling out information, and that's critically important that we are on the same page. So I hope that you would get back to Senator Cantwell in this committee as to a more definitive timeline on the restaurant rollout, and so that we can let our constituents know when they can expect to get help.
Mr. Chairman, can we ensure that that information gets to all of the members of the committee?
Yes, when it gets to the committee, it'll get to all the members of our committee. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for participating today. It is an important hearing. Congress has resorted, obviously, to some unprecedented policies to help small businesses and their employees get through this pandemic. And we charged a very small agency with standing up massive relief programs and providing hundreds of billions of dollars in aid. And for the most part, these relief programs, and particularly the Paycheck Protection Program, were very, very successful. And in the state of Iowa, we know that the Paycheck Protection Program and several others saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. However, there have been a number of problems as outlined by my colleagues, including, just as the ranking member said, the Planned Parenthood affiliates that violated SBA's affiliation rules to receive the Paycheck Protection Program. And this is unacceptable, and we do expect that SBA will hold Planned Parenthood and those affiliates accountable. And I am so grateful to have the opportunity to discuss some of these programs today. And a number of the questions I had have actually been asked by other members, but I'd like to underscore some of what has already been brought up. I know that we are working to prevent fraud. SBA is very intent upon that. We've heard from many Iowans that were eligible to receive a second round of PPP, but they've been unable to receive those funds because of the hold codes that have been placed against their loan. And in your testimony, Mr. Kelly, you said that there were approximately 190,000 loans with outstanding hold codes. And what is being done right now to resolve those hold codes? And maybe you could explain at what rate this number has been declining just in recent weeks.
Sure. Thank you for the question. The hold codes themselves are not, first off, dispositive of ineligibility, nor are they dispositive of fraud, waste, and abuse. What they are is a set of alerts that are indicators, as Mr. Scheer and Mr. Ware have indicated, are helpful in identifying places where we need to point our efforts. So it begins, that population was originally a 2 million instance population that has been culled down over the last several months to that population that I referenced in my testimony of 190,000. What we are in the process of doing is working with the lending community to adopt certification language that they have given feedback on that should help them process lender certifications that they are able to clear, which is one of the accelerants. Second, we had, beginning in November of 2020, the agency commissioned a machine learning tool and created a pool of applications for testing. And we are on the precipice of deploying that machine learning tool. And the combination of those two things should go a long way to addressing the hold codes that the remaining hold code population, consistent with protecting against fraud, waste, and abuse.
No, that's very good, and I appreciate that. Of course, the sooner the better. So I'm glad to hear that you are updating the system with machine learning. I think there's a lot that could be taken from that. I'm just going to reiterate a little bit about some of the other issues that were brought up in addition to fraud. Senator Cantwell had also mentioned the shuttered venue operating grant applications process. And hopefully we do have a little smoother rollout than we did with the Paycheck Protection Program, because I know there were banks that in order to get the applications in, they were up in the middle of the night submitting those applications. So hopefully we can speed that along a little bit, just to double down on what Senator Cantwell was saying. And then finally, because I just have a few seconds remaining, Mr. Kelly, for the Paycheck Protection loan forgiveness. I've heard from a number of Iowa universities and rural hospitals who received the PPP loans, and they have been waiting quite a while for their forgiveness. I had a college in Northwest Iowa that applied for forgiveness back in the fall, but they have yet to hear anything back from the SBA. If they don't get their loan forgiven by April 15th, then they will be forced to change their annual audit numbers, and that likely will impact their Department of Education financial ratings. So this is an issue. I appreciate the fact that SBA is scrutinizing the larger loans, but certainly we need to make sure we're getting what loans are forgivable forgiven in a timely manner. So can you just very briefly provide us with a quick update on the process and timing for the forgiveness of those larger loans?
Yes. So beginning last week, we deployed a tiered sampling clearance process. So there's a sampling population that is going to be part of our improper payments process that you begin after 12 months. And that sampling population was creating a one-size-fits-all between the smallest loans and the largest loans. And we have determined now, after processing nearly 50% of the forgiveness applications, that we can make adjustments to that. That will free up resources to point towards the 30,000 loans in excess of 2 million. In addition, as I mentioned, the machine learning model tool will clear hold codes that have caused delays. And we are also in a position where we can start to modify the forgiveness process from 150,000 to 2 million, because we've taken in all of the data analytics and learnings from processing nearly 50% of the units. And so now we feel confident about the trend line. For example, 87% of filers are showing no reduction to FTE because they are electing to use the 24-week period. So those are some of the things, Senator, that we will deploy.
Very good. No, thank you. And again, sooner is always better, I think, for all of the members on this committee as well, as we're working through this pandemic. But Mr. Kelly, I thank you very much. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Certainly. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the representatives from the SBA who are testifying today. We very much appreciate the really enormous effort that SBA has put in over the last year to helping our small businesses get through this period. And I would like to begin by reiterating what you've heard from virtually everyone who's spoken today, and that is the importance of getting clear guidance out about the programs as quickly as possible. I share Senator Cantwell's concerns because I've heard those from the restaurant and from venues, entertainment venues in New Hampshire, that they are barely holding on. And if they don't get the guidance soon for what it's going to take to apply for help, they may not be able to survive. So anything that can be done to address that. And Mr. Kelly, I appreciate that you were talking a little bit about some of the steps that can be taken to expedite this information. But we also provided, I think, over $1 billion to help SBA with funding for administering these and other new programs. Is there any particular advice? This is really probably for the Inspector General, Mr. Ware, for how this money should be spent or how it's being spent now to ensure that these programs are getting done and that particularly the new programs that businesses so desperately need are being expedited?
Thank you very much for the question. So it's important that I always designate that I cannot, in my capacity, my oversight capacity, provide their exact program steps, how they're supposed to spend their money. But I could make sure that the proper environment is in place. And when it comes to utilizing those funds, I've said from the beginning, and that's from as early as I believe it was March 20th, was when we put out the first one, that it was important to have these updated SOPs and that they were communicated to the lenders, and also that if they were going to ramp up in terms of hiring, that training was not forgotten. Because, and as I said earlier on, these were findings that we found like in other, when we were in other disasters, and we had ARA and things of that sort that we knew that they needed to focus on.
So, Mr. Kelly, is SBA able to do that, to provide the foundation that Mr. Ware is talking about, to spend those administrative dollars? I know you have a lot going on, but anything we can do to help move the process along, I think would really be appreciated.
Yes, I think the system is working in concert. So I think that the recommendations from the GAO and from Mr. Ware's office, the Inspector General, beginning last spring, have been deployed meaningfully beginning in October of 2020. And the system platform, looking ahead to the restaurant program, because of the things that are in place, for example, with PPP in terms of its technology, as well as the sampling systems, the ability to do, to check for individual identity and business identity in the banking world, know your customer type issues. Those things are all in place. And so I want to underscore something from your testimony and the rest of the members. We get it. We are working as fast as we can and around the clock to get the restaurant relief program up off the ground. And so the time frame that we're trying to go for is in the next 30 days. It's March 24th. And so a 30-day launch to product is only possible because of the IG and the GAO putting those recommendations out last spring and the agency acting in the fall to create the framework and infrastructure to support that scale that quickly, but with protecting against fraud, waste, and abuse.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I'm almost out of time, but I do want to ask a final question, because one of the other frustrations I've heard from our small businesses in New Hampshire relates to the rollout of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, where early on, despite what was in the legislation, the SBA decided to limit those advanced grants to $1,000 per employee, opposed to the $10,000 per business minimum that we actually set. And the American Rescue Plan that recently passed included additional funding to help true up those businesses who may have received less funding from the EIDL grant program than that for which they were eligible. So can you talk about whether the true-up is happening now, and are small businesses able to get that additional funding that they thought they were going to get in the very beginning? And what can we tell small businesses who are interested in trying to do that?
Hi, Senator. Thank you for that question. As you know, we sized from 1 to 10,000 based on demand, and we ran out of funds, that first $20 billion by July the 10th. Taking that approach with the last administration, we started providing funds for the targeted advance this last week, and we're up to $10 million. We had to work through some of the internal controls that, for example, that Mike Ware put on us. We're checking do not pay, and we're checking all these different items. Regardless of that, we're going to start rolling out in the billions of dollars here in the near future within the next couple of weeks. We have the arrangement worked out with the IRS. We have all the information that we need, and we've sent out over 3.8 million emails, and we received back 500,000 requesting the advance. So we're working through that process right now, and the money will start flowing quickly, and we'll provide progress updates as we start rolling the funds out for the targeted advance.
So just so I understand, are you sending emails to everybody who would qualify under that program?
Yes, ma'am, because the requirements had low-income community, so we had to go out and get a contract that shows policy map, and then we're going to respond to everybody whether they're in a low-income community or not. So as part of that process, we know who out of the original 10 million applications, who's been in a low-income community and who's out. So we started with the low-income community priority 1. Those small businesses that receive less than 10,000. So we're doing the priority 1 first, and then we're doing priority 2 second, which were those small businesses that didn't have funding when we ran out of funds on July the 10th. So we have $30 billion to roll through, and we've sent out close to the 3.8 million emails, and then they go back in. That's an email invite, so they go back into the portal so they can complete the application and start the process for the targeted advance.
That's great. Thank you very much. There are a lot of small businesses in New Hampshire who will be very happy to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, we're going to go to Senator Inhofe, and after Senator Inhofe, it'll be Senator Booker by WebEx. Senator Inhofe.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have I have a couple of questions, both for Mr. Kelly, and both being very parochial to Oklahoma. And let me just kind of share and see if you've heard of a situation like this, other than the situation that is in my state of Oklahoma. The December COVID relief authorization second draw, the PPP loans that took place, in order to be eligible, businesses must have lost the 25% revenue between the years of 2019 and 2020. Now, unfortunately, some businesses have been changed ownership in that time, and there doesn't seem to be anything there that addresses this as a problem. I'll be specific. In the town of Cushing, Oklahoma, a couple named J.D. Meissner and his wife Mary Lee bought a newspaper, the Cushing Citizen, in February 2020, only a month before the COVID-19 lockdowns began. Now, their business model stayed the same, yet J.D. and Mary Lee have been unable to receive a second draw or really to have this problem addressed. What happens in this unique situation? I'm sure they're not the only ones where this has taken place. What would you suggest in looking at ways to mitigate, I would say, unintended circumstances that they found themselves in?
Senator, it's an excellent question. And as I mentioned in my testimony, I'm relatively new, 3 weeks into the job, but I can assure you that it has come up in other states. Change of ownership during the pandemic is creating an issue with second draws about whether or not the entity the NewCo post-acquisition, it should apply as NewCo first draw, or does it apply second draw because of the outstanding? So what I'd like to do is take this offline, work with the staff and committee. We are addressing this through our Office of Policy, but it has been raised. It's an issue that we need to clarify because it is coming up, and I appreciate the question.
Well, I'd ask a further question. Why would there be a difference if you had a change, if all the plans were the same and nothing else changed, but only the ownership during that period of time? I can't think of any justification for that. Or do you know if the particular case that I'm referencing? I'm not sure whether our staff had sent that up in preparation for this meeting. And
No.
Sorry. What do you suggest, though, in this particular case that we do?
Yeah, so I apologize because I agree with you that it should be common sense. However, the way that the SBA loan programs typically work is they consider a combined NewCo, seller and buyer, post-acquisition, as a new company. And so that's what creates the tension, because the seller was the first draw recipient, but now there is a new company that's been formed post-acquisition. And so does that apply through the first draw and the second draw? And I apologize for letting you down, Senator. I don't have the answer right at this moment. But I will get it.
I didn't anticipate that you'd have the answer, but if you would look into that particular case, because I know there are other examples around that would fall into a category that probably should be addressed. So if you do that, let me know. I'd appreciate it. The second thing is it's kind of similar. It is local. Back in February, the SBA changed the calculation for the PPP loans for certain small businesses, and a lot more, as you're fully aware, of the independent contractors, sole proprietors, and self-employed individuals are now eligible for the PPP and can receive higher loan amounts. Yet the businesses, some of them, I know in my state of Oklahoma, were not aware of the change that had been made, which opened it up to them, but they were not aware of it. And so we have cases where in Oklahoma where businesses actually are closing simply because they think that they remain ineligible when in fact they're now eligible. So what are they doing to make sure that these changes are properly communicated? What would be the path forward for someone who's already passed a deadline? Could you address that?
So I think just to clarify, Senator, are you referring to the gross income calculation for sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, and 1099?
Yes, that's what yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we do need to amplify that message, and part of what we tried to do, a month ago was to begin that effort. There's more work to be done, but I would recommend your staff to send me an inquiry, and we'll work with constituents to help them.
Oh, okay. And I'll also include some others that were kind of involved in this. So I thought, and it's a tough job. You make changes like that, and all of a sudden you have a large population that becomes eligible or ineligible because of that. So anyway, if you'll do that and get back with me, I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hall. For the purposes of the members knowing when they're going to be called, because we have people that are on WebEx, they've been there, they have not. We're going to go to Senator Booker, then we're going to go to Senator Hawley, then we're going to go to Senator Markey, then we're going to go to Senator Marshall. So, Senator Booker.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks to all the panelists that are here. I'm really appreciating the testimony that has been given so far and a lot of the assurances. It's really encouraging. Look, our small business owners have to know that help is on the way. With the American Rescue Plan, this is an extraordinary opportunity for American entrepreneurs all around the country. And I'm grateful for Isabel Guzman and her leadership, and I'm grateful for the important work of everybody on the panel. Congress and the SBA, I think, should be praised for their work. Obviously, there are challenges in executing that we should address. And I'm concerned about the testimony today, particularly some of the mismanagement challenges that we faced. They have contributed to small businesses not getting the resources they needed, particularly underserved minority businesses. that often end up falling through the cracks. My last year in the Senate, and I'm so grateful for my colleagues on the committee led by Senator Cardin, really have fought to make the SBA work for everyone. I'm grateful that we have tried to focus a lot of our energy on the smallest of businesses. And so if I could just quickly put a question to Associate Administrator Rivera. It seems that, compounding the access issues that underserved entrepreneurs face, SPA programs like EIDL were unable to meet the needs of small business owners because they were understaffed and have faced a lot of unresponsiveness. There weren't the right protocols and guidance in place to prevent massive fraud, diverting funds away from legitimate businesses. And so as a result, very small businesses have been left waiting, and in some cases are still waiting. And so I appreciate your commitment to identifying and rectifying the problems identified by the IG and the GAO and Administrator Guzman. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about the steps the SBA is taking to ensure that the additional $35 billion in EIDL funding is really going to go to those who need it most.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. So we put these internal controls in place, as a friendly reminder. When CARES was issued, one of the most significant internal controls that we always rely on is the tax transcript and the credit elsewhere test, both which were by statute not allowed under CARES. We relied on self-reported income. We had an algorithm that was pretty straightforward, but we did realize, as Mike Wares highlighted, and as Bill Shears commented also, that there were opportunities for identity theft. We have been working very closely with the IG and with all of the different lenders and with the regulatory agencies on how to address identity theft and how to work through those processes. But in the meantime, what we're also doing on a parallel track is we're reaching out with as many communities as we can to hit those pockets that you're talking about that generally don't get hit. We have a lot of parallels in the disaster program. For example, when there's a disaster that goes through a certain community, we do a lot of outreach at the local level with the chambers of commerce, with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, with the Black Chambers of Commerce, and we go through those different areas, and we're committed to reaching out to those underserved communities, Black, brown, so forth and so on. So if there's pockets that we're not reaching out, please let us know. We'll be glad to be reaching out to those different areas.
Yeah, and I know my team and I will have some thoughts about not just the outreach, but to make it even more effective. If I can go really quickly in the remaining moments I have to Associate Administrator Kelly, we have really savage disparities of wealth that fall along racial lines, and it's a reflection of an awful history of African Americans being excluded from so many of the wealth building opportunities we've seen in our nation, from the land grant programs that excluded Blacks that helped so many American immigrants get large tracts of land, all the way to redlining, mortgage discrimination, and more. I know you're familiar with this and have witnessed the difficulties that Black borrowers have faced in accessing capital in general in the decades, in recent decades. In 2015, you talked about the economic fallout of that downturn, of the last downturn, where you said borrowers hardest hit by the 2008 housing crisis are the last to see a recovery come to them. And so looking forward, as we emerge from this economic and public health crisis, I'm wondering, what steps do you think the SBA should be taking to mitigate the impact of this recession for minority owners? And in addition, the important SBA provisions in the ARP include a number of important stabilizers, from direct payments to extended UI to rental assistance to tax cut for families. How do you anticipate that those provisions might help for a more equitable recovery?
Thank you, Senator. This is, as you point out, is a systemic problem. It's a longstanding issue. It is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration, and in particular for Administrator Guzman. Part of the reason that I came back to serve for Administrator Guzman is to attack this particular issue that you described. In particular, I think that the solution that we are architecting to around the restaurant program will prove as a template for the type of technology tools that we can leverage to create the type of platform to originate programs supporting small dollar loans to give scale to this particular problem. The nature of the problem is such that at a local level, the funds that do the most good just aren't simply enough to meet the demand. And they are limited in terms of their resources to deploy that. And so there's only so many fundraisers that they can fund. There's not enough assets to draw down against on a warehouse line. There's not enough technical assistance, staff to employ. So we need to bring the full weight of the SBA to bear on this. Historically, we have tried through lending intermediaries. It has had mixed results. And so I'd love to continue this dialogue with this committee and any member of the staff or anybody to start to really think transformatively about this issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Kelly, if I could just come back to you and return to an issue that Senator Paul asked you about. Earlier today, my staff was notified, and I know Senator Paul's was too, that the latest tranche of small business administrative data, SBA data, suggested that at least 2 Planned Parenthood affiliates received second draw loans from the PPP. Senator Paul asked you about this. I just wanted to be clear about your responses. Is that accurate to your knowledge? I mean, have Planned Parenthood affiliates received second draw loans through this program?
So thank you for clarifying. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of the 2 loans that you're referencing. So in my response to Senator Paul, I was pointing out that there are over 8 million loans currently in the portfolio. So as of this moment, I'm not aware of the 2 instances, but I'm happy to talk offline with your staff and members of the committee about those. And what I did say is that the other direct question was, has there been any changes to the program? And there have not.
Will if this is in fact correct, if the data that we've received based on the SBA's disclosures is correct, will the SBA ask these affiliates to return the money?
If any borrower, including these 2 instances, is ineligible, there is a process that the agency goes through to deal with improper payments. And so I'm not totally read into that entire process, but we take it seriously, and we'll follow up with the committee to let them know what the agency's normal course is historically for handling any improper payments.
Thank you for that. You know, I just for those who are keeping track at home here, I mean, what has happened is at least 38 Planned Parenthood affiliates have received more than, it looks like, $80 million through the Paycheck Protection Program. This appears to be in pretty direct conflict with the affiliation rules that are written into the statute. But what's really frustrating is the larger background here is that in the original CARES Act language, there was language that would have unequivocally prevented Planned Parenthood from getting these funds, and it was negotiated away. It was given away in favor of this affiliation language, which also prevents Planned Parenthood from getting funds, let's be clear, but it gives a lot more wiggle room to the agency, a lot more wiggle room. And it was negotiated, that original language that the pro-life advocates fought so hard for was negotiated away by Republican leaders. And so here we are, where we have, lo and behold, 38 Planned Parenthood affiliates get money. Now more are getting second draw. And by the way, this is before the latest December relief bill even went into effect, according to the data that we got today. So it's just, you know, for those who wonder on the conservative side of things, those who wonder why voters tend to be cynical about politicians who promise them that they're going to fight for pro-life causes and then end up in situations like this. This is why. You know, at the time, I was repeatedly told by Republican leaders that the change to the affiliation language would absolutely not result in taxpayer money flowing to Planned Parenthood. And that was wrong. It's happened 40 times or more now. And I don't think a penny of it has been returned. It was absolutely wrong. So, here we are once again. All I have to say is I cannot blame pro-life voters for being upset and being cynical about this. And Mr. Kelly, this has, you just got there, as you say. So it is what it is. But I will hold you to it in terms of following up with me and then also enforcing the terms of the laws that are written. Mr. Ware, I want to turn to you, if I could, in just my brief time remaining, and talk about the EIDL program. This is a program that I think is important, and it has caused, though, a lot of frustration for my constituents back at home who have faced a lot of obstacles dating back, of course, to last spring in getting access to this program. And what's really frustrating is to see reports from the OIG that suggest that the program has a lot of abuse and a lot of fraud and dollars being paid out to people who shouldn't get it when deserving and qualifying small businesses can't access the program. So can you just give me a high-level overview of the prevalence of fraud in this program, in the EIDL program?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Well, from early on, and you saw when we put out the alert on EIDL, we started getting quite a bit of calls from the banks. We had gotten over 5,000, and then we started to get really inundated in our hotline with constant calls about the fact that it's obvious their identity had been stolen because they've never taken out a loan with SBA, and they're showing up that they got these they got these loans, economic injury disaster loans, on their credit report, or they were receiving correspondence from the agency saying that your loan payment is deferred until X date. And that's when we really started to get the calls. And we started to dig in as to what was really going on. We started to dig in like, hey, we need to set up, your controls are not in place that need to be in place. There are just some simple follow-up questions that we think could be asked on the front end, but folks have to be in place to address these, the follow-ups. There may be reasons why there were people with duplicate IP addresses or duplicate email addresses or physical addresses. There may be a reason why somebody changed their bank account that the money's supposed to go on after they were approved. There may be a reason for all that, but when all of them come together, when they had each of these together, then it was imperative that something be changed immediately to address this. And that's where a lot of the whole codes came in. But that's what the problem was. Up front, the control environment just was not correct. I would say this. Initially, particularly the one concerning the changing of the account numbers to not your to like FinCEN type or financial the online type accounts, or blue dot, green dot type accounts after the fact. When we notified them of that, they moved to make that change almost immediately. Some of the others didn't come as quickly, but still, they were still working on putting some of these holds in place so that we could get at the money.
Thank you. Go ahead.
We were able, along with SBA, I think we've pulled back a total of like 2.1 billion so far in terms of seizing money in these accounts and pulling them back.
I thank you for that, and I'll follow up with you more in written questions. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Markey by WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I'd like to follow up on the line of inquiry that Senator Booker was pursuing. And I'd like to ask the officials from the SBA, specifically, what are you doing at PPP and EIDL to make sure, and the other programs, to make sure that minority and women small business owners are getting their fair share, and it's not going, as it was initially, disproportionately to white, well-off, well-connected businesses?
Well, to speak to the PPP program, and I'll let James obviously speak to EIDL, Senator. As you know, one of the changes that the Biden-Harris administration recently announced, that's been referenced in the hearing earlier regarding gross income change to support a better calculation or a fairer calculation for sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, and 1099s, enables those folks to get arguably a higher PPP loan amount. That's important to your question because the Census Bureau data demonstrates that those populations of type of businesses over-index to minorities in particular as well as women. So that is one change that directly puts more money into the pockets of minority business owners, for example, that we're focused on. I think the other changes that we made to the eligibility issues are not unique to minority borrowers, but certainly they benefit from regarding the student debt changes, as well as changes made to immigrant status and then ex-offenders. And so those are some other important eligibility checks that obviously impact everyone, but would include minority business owners. I think the other thing that we are focused on, like a laser, for example, as we move forward to the restaurant program, is that the bill specifically calls out a 21-day prioritization period for social and economically disadvantaged individuals. So there'll be a lot of focus around that, and certainly the Community Navigators program is a big piece of that.
Can I ask again? Can I ask Mr. Rivera and Mr. Kelly, what are you doing in order to make sure that targeted communities know that this funding is available to them? What is your marketing plan for these smaller businesses that oftentimes are outside of the regular network of businesses in the country?
Yeah, so specifically to PPP changes, I participated in 6 or 7 hour-plus webinars targeted to specific segments of the population, including minority business owners, including Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber. And so we are doing outreach like that. We're also obviously amplifying the message. The current leader of OCPL, Cynthia, my colleague, is actually very experienced in community grassroots organizing and getting the word out in the communities that you are wanting us to target. So it's a combination of that, but it's also a combination of PPP was limited because the thrust of the distribution channel, meaning banks of all different sizes, prioritized existing clients, which of course excluded the underbanked population. So any solution moving forward has to contemplate that limitation to the leveraging lending intermediaries when we think about access to capital issues.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about the targeting strategies you might have?
So, Senator, we on the disaster side for economic injury disaster loan, we also used our existing resource partners that you're well aware of in the district offices to amplify it in addition to the disaster staff that normally reaches out during disasters. But as always, if you have other thoughts or comments for us, please let us know, and we can follow accordingly. So we appreciate the
well, that's great. Okay, and we've been working with Bob Nelson, the regional SBA director. My staff has been in constant contact with them, and we just want to make sure, though, that there's an ongoing, intensifying effort to reach those targeted communities, that the message being sent from, and resources from the top down. Thank you all so much. Thanks for your great efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Mr. Kelly. Can you tell me? Can you tell me why the SBA continues to not allow farming and ranching partnerships to use the same income calculations as sole proprietors when determining eligibility for PPP? This is centered around a gross versus net income and used for eligibility for the PPP program.
Yes, Senator. So on Monday, staffers from the Hill had a call with the United States Treasury and the SBA to walk through tax and reporting issues for farmers that are set up as partnerships other than JVs. They determined that the legislation would be required to modify the way these certain partnerships could calculate loan amounts because this could raise additional issues for all other partnerships and sole proprietors. So right now, the answer is suboptimal, I would imagine, for your constituents, but that is what the U.S. Treasury, the SBA, and the legislative staff determined as of Monday.
Well, it's very disappointing. Maybe we can find a legislative fix. My next question for Mr. Ware. Mr. Ware, I'm sure you're aware of the Hyde Amendment, and basically it says we cannot use federal dollars for abortions. Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion provider in the nation, if not the world, and they received $80 million of Paycheck Protection dollars. Do you have any concern that that's in violation of the Hyde Amendment?
Thank you for your question. We have not, as an office, taken a direct look into Planned Parenthood or that amendment. Our oversight plan shows that we have a string of audits that will be done on eligibility under which this will be covered. But so far, we have not looked into it.
If the dollars were forgiven, would that raise your level of concern?
Well, once we look into it and I could determine eligibility or not, take a close look in it, then I could better answer that question. But I mean, it's in the queue to be done. It's not something that's a long-term thing that's going to take a whole long time to get done.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, do you have any concerns if those loans are forgiven, it's in violation of the Hyde Amendment?
I apologize. I'm not as familiar with exactly. I'm generally aware of the Hyde Amendment. I don't know with particular loan instances how it might apply. So I'm happy to get back to the committee offline about that once I'm better educated on the issues at bar.
Okay, I want to circle back with Mr. Ware and this affiliation issue with Planned Parenthood one more time, just to make sure I understand where you're coming from. As you know, the Planned Parenthood Federation of America provides oversight, and for all practical purposes, all these Planned Parenthood affiliates work under them with 16,000 employees. Do you have concern that they purposefully, fraudulently broke the rules of this program? I know our banks work so hard wearing belts and suspenders that this would seem like a gray line at best. I'm surprised they found a bank to do this. I feel like the Planned Parenthood has just thumbed their nose at us once again. Do you have any concerns about this affiliation breach by Planned Parenthood?
I am concerned with any entity that was not eligible to receive funding. But like I said, I have not looked into Planned Parenthood. The office has not looked into Planned Parenthood specifically, so I can't speak about it in an educated manner. But it is in the queue to be reviewed in terms of eligibility requirements. And at that time, we will have a resounding answer for it.
Thank you. My next question for Mr. Kelly. Can you comment on how the Small Business Administration chose a vendor to design and execute the portal for applications to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program? Was it an open bid competition? How many vendors were met with, and how was the final selection done?
I can't comment on that yet because we haven't formally kicked off that process. So there are options, as you know, granted the agency to leverage that they've leveraged in the past under exigent circumstances to get the money out the door. Some of your colleagues, for example, today were re-emphasizing the need to get this out fast. We will use the sources and uses of procurement that are consistent with what the agency's done in the past to deal with standing up programs in exigent circumstances.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
We will now go, I believe, to Senator Hirono, if she is ready.
Ready.
Okay.
This is a question for Mr. Kelly. Earlier this month, Congress, as we all know, passed the American Rescue Plan Act, and particularly focusing on supporting small businesses, including the Community Navigator Program for underserved businesses. And Congress has enacted a number of relief programs over the last year, and we need to make sure that businesses know what resources are available to them, and that's one of the purposes of the Navigator program. Can you provide an update on the implementation of the Community Navigator program?
So, Senator, I know that for Administrator Guzman, this is a key priority. However, I do not oversee this particular part of ARP's implementation at SBA, but I would encourage you to seek out my colleague Mark Madrid and the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, who will be overseeing those efforts.
Perhaps I could send my questions relating to the Navigator program to the people that you mentioned, and they will respond to me, because it is really important that they reach out to underserved communities such as Native Hawaiian businesses. And I'm very interested to know how they plan to reach out to other underserved businesses. Again, for you, Mr. Kelly, I mean, there's no question that there has been an ongoing effort by the Republicans to defund Planned Parenthood at every turn. That is a fact. So you have been asked a number of questions along those lines relating to Planned Parenthood, and let's face it, the previous administration's ideological efforts to treat certain nonprofits differently, such as Planned Parenthood, raises a lot of concerns for us. And last year, SBA sent letters to local Planned Parenthood organizations making, quote unquote, preliminary conclusions of ineligibility for PPP based on supposed violations of the program's affiliation rules, here's the thing, while other similarly situated nonprofits did not receive such letters. So for example, as far as I know, YMCAs didn't get such letters. Boys and Girls Clubs didn't get such letters. So of the nearly 8 million loans approved under PPP, can you tell me how many preliminary or final conclusions of ineligibility SBA has made about any other nonprofit organization besides Planned Parenthood for violation of affiliation rules under the PPP program?
No, I cannot give you that exact number today, but I can tell you that we take seriously, I think, the import of your question, which is the affiliation rule needs to apply equally across the board to every one of those 8 million instances, and consistent with Mr. Ware, that's what we are doing, or attempting to do. And we're following the affiliation rule. And I share his concern that if folks are eligible, they should get funds. And if they're ineligible, they should not get funds.
So ideological perspectives have absolutely no place in this administration's decision-making, or the SBA's decision-making as to who should qualify for PPP. Is that right?
It was a little broad, Senator, because you suggested ideological across the administration. So I don't have that big a job, but I would say for my small piece of the neighborhood, yes, we are calling balls and strikes, which is applying the rules as they're set forth in the statute equally. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that I would like to know really the answer to my question, because you had 8 million in loans. I would like to know what other affiliated groups got this kind of letter that Planned Parenthood got. So I'm glad to know that you all are doing things totally on a factual basis. I do have a question about PPP loan forgiveness. This is for you again, Mr. Kelly. So SBA recently reported loan forgiveness numbers for PPP, and I'm encouraged to learn that 40% of borrowers who received loans last year have already received forgiveness. Can you provide a further update on the loan forgiveness process?
Yeah. So first off, I think I referenced in my testimony that roughly 40% of applications from 2020 have received forgiveness, and pleased to report that in excess of 99% have received full forgiveness. A couple of the limiting factors on processing forgiveness at the outset was manpower to process manual reviews related to requests for further action, to look at a particular file, related to eligibility issues, for example, as we were speaking about earlier. And also the lenders themselves being an intermediary or a middle entity, hitting the pause button to process loans related to this round of PPP originations. I think it was a huge step that Congress, in a bipartisan way, stepped forward and streamlined the process for loans under 150,000. And my office recently has deployed a tiered sampling methodology that reflects the spirit of that to expedite the clearance of these forgiveness applications on our end. But we're currently not meeting our mandate for the loans in excess of 2 million. There's a population of 30,000, and we are aware that we could do better in meeting the 90 days or less for that particular threshold, and that's what we'll attack.
Yes, please let the committee know what resources you need in order to meet your obligations to the PPP borrowers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. We'll now go to Senator Rosen. I do want to again compliment her in her efforts to get the cap lifted on the EIDL loan program. Good work, and looks like we're making a lot of progress. Senator Rosen.
Well, Chairman Cardin, I wanted to thank you not only for holding this important oversight hearing, but to thank you for your work with me on that. And I just want to take this brief moment to thank Administrator Guzman, again, Chairman Cardin, the witnesses here today from SBA for working with me and, of course, others to lift the prior administration's EIDL loan cap that for the past year has blocked our American small businesses from obtaining critical funding that they needed to stay afloat during the pandemic. As the chairman and Mr. Rivera mentioned earlier, just before this hearing, the SBA announced that it will be raising and then, I hope, eliminating the EIDL loan cap. This change, which was Congress's intention in the first place, will help unleash the economic potential of our amazing small businesses across this country as they navigate through the ongoing pandemic. So, Mr. Rivera, as you know, 1 year ago this week, Congress passed the CARES Act. It included the provisions to ensure that our so important, our small businesses, 99% of business in Nevada, small business, that they receive their disaster loans and grants in full. And struggling businesses, Nevada, across the country, they've still been waiting a year for more assistance. So I'm thrilled that you're responding to Senator Corna and I, and again, thank you. But I want to follow up on Senator Shaheen's question, which I'm not sure you directly addressed. I'd also like to know, now that the SBA has announced it's raising the loan caps from 150,000 to 500,000, and perhaps eventually to the 2 million, is SBA considering similar action to lift or raise the caps on the EIDL advance grants, regardless of size or location, which would benefit the smallest of small businesses that are the backbones of each and every one of our community, those family-owned businesses, those entrepreneurs that are really struggling right now?
Thank you for your question, Senator. My understanding of the targeted advance the targeted advance is it's pretty prescriptive, and it is capped at $10,000. I'm not aware that we can go above the $10,000 threshold.
No, but it was, you had capped it at $1,000, $1,000 per employee. So people weren't getting the full $10,000. So if they had 4 employees, they might be getting $4,000 when really we had intended to give them $10,000.
Yes, ma'am, you're correct. So under the previous administration, we sized based on the number of employees. The thought process behind that was to try to extend as many dollars as possible. As you know, we ran out of the first $20 billion around July the 10th. So now with the additional 30 billion, we received 20 and then an additional 10, so we have 30 billion. We are doing 2 priorities. The first priority is to resize everybody from whatever that 1,000 up to 9,000 up to 10,000. And then priority 2 will be to start with any applicant when we run out of funds, or any small business when we run out of funds after July 10th. So we've already sent out 3.8 million emails, and we've received approximately 500,000 applications. And we will start, that started rolling out this last week, the funds did. We've done 10 million in the first couple of days, but we have approximately, I checked this morning, about $1 billion in the queue that we'll be providing those funds to in the next week. And we'll continue to look for opportunities to, to try to get all the funds out.
Please let us know about that, what resources you need, and how we can really help these small businesses where $10,000 versus $1,000 really makes a difference. I want to talk really quickly in the last minute I have about data transparency. Last year, the GAO released reports concerning about a lack of safeguards to prevent fraud in the SBA emergency loan programs. And it became clear SBA was unwilling to share critical data needed to complete the accurate and thorough investigations. In response, I sent a letter along with Senators Markey, Booker, and Duckworth requesting that the agency comply with all past, current, and future SBA, OIG, and GAO data requests so that we have the oversight bodies, we can accurately and effectively investigate potential fraud. So my question to you is, what can Congress do to help strengthen the collaboration between SBA and your offices to ensure that full accountability and transparency of SBA's use of tax dollars?
So the transparency is there now. It's a change in administration and perspective, and it's a new day for us. We're being very transparent. And for the IG's office, last month we gave the IG 10 of their agents on the criminal side full unfettered access to our system. And we also, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, we gave Bill Scheer and the IG team, the GAO team, full data that they have, from that perspective. So our contractors also taking a different approach where, they're also providing unfettered access to all the data. So as far as transparency, it's in place, and that's one of the directives that I've also received from Administrator Guzman, who's been real clear that she wants us to be able to report up frequently, and be clear and transparent from that perspective. So thank you for the question.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to be sure that our hardworking small businesses and their families get the support that they need. Thank you so much. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Hickenlooper by WebEx.
Sorry about that. Thank you, all of you, for your work on this, and it's important work. Mr. Rivera, as you know, we wrote a letter suggesting changes to the current EIDL program, really around deferring loan payment, allowing larger loans for longer terms. The changes just announced are going to benefit, I think, more and more small businesses. Can you give the committee a brief update on why SBA decided on allowing a maximum loan of $500,000 as opposed to $2 million? Is there a timeline for how long the $500,000 loan cap will be in place?
So sure. When we originally built the system, we use software as a service. So our software provider, when we built the system, we built it at $500,000. We originally started the first month of loans up to $500,000 because that's phase one under the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. We pivoted and were resized back to $150,000, as everybody knows. So the system is built right now to $500,000. The week of April the 7th, we will start accepting emails so we can resize that. And it's a pretty simple process. We're going to extend the economic injury period from 6 months to 24 months. So we'll go from January of 2020 to December 31st of 2021. So they'll get the full 2 years worth of economic injury. So we'll resize to that point. It may take us a couple of months, unfortunately, to get the system built to include the collateral requirements that we need for a loan above $500,000 from that perspective. But we're working very aggressively to try to get the system up to $2 million as soon as possible.
Great, I appreciate that. Also, in the American Rescue Plan, Congress set aside over $28 billion for the SBA to support restaurants. This is after the shuttered venues. I guess we're finally getting that going. I understand the challenges of starting to give grants for the first time. What's the status of implementing the ARP provisions, such as the restaurant fund?
Do you want to pick that up, Patrick, for me?
Yeah, sure. So, Senator, as we referenced earlier, we're focused like a laser on standing it up as quickly as possible. Right now, there's a question from Senator Marshall about vendor selection, and we need to go through that because we will need a technology platform to deploy what we expect to be hundreds of thousands of grants. as I mentioned earlier in answers to questions from your colleagues, there is a lot of good that's in the bill itself that gives us flexibility to expedite standing the program up, because it's not a typical grant program, and that's a good thing. It functions a lot more like a direct payment, which lends itself to us moving faster and leveraging automated solutions over manual reviews, for example, to expedite the processing of those. And we're looking at leveraging intermediaries, third-party point of sale vendors, for example, which restaurants use. So food trucks, for example, often use Square as just one vendor. And they, of course, have the relevant sales data that's germane to the calculation. And so by drafting off of them, as well as posting our own web application, we believe we can reach the broadest market segment fast. So this is a top priority for Administrator Guzman.
Great, thank you. I had 25 hard years in the restaurant business, so I appreciate you going that extra bit. Mr. Kelly, the changes made by PPP have helped smaller Main Street businesses. What happens to the remaining funds if the program is not extended before it expires?
Yeah, so the funds themselves are no longer accessible from the obviously. So any inbound applications that have not received an authorization from the SBA on or before March 31st can no longer be processed. And so I think there's obviously enough funding that were the Senate to follow the House to vote for extension, there's enough funds to get us through mid to late April, at least on the trend line that we're seeing right now. And we do see demand. We are receiving daily, as I'm sure your office is, small business seeking the relief. So again, this has been an awesome thing that Republicans and Democrats have done together for over a year, and that this agency is deployed. And so that's why the administration supports extension.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is a crucial time in the lives of so many small businesses, and I know how hard you've all worked to try and get these resources out where they're critically needed. So I really do appreciate it. I know all those businesses in Colorado across the country need it as well. I appear somehow I'm out of time, so I will yield.
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. Appreciate your experience on this committee. I want to ask one or two more questions, and then I think we'll be able to wrap up. I appreciate the fact that you have gotten direction from the Biden administration as well as from the administrator in regards to transparency, and we've seen that. So we appreciate that very, very much. But the information that's been requested in regards to the loans and loan forgiveness has made it difficult for us in Congress, as well as the administration, to carry out oversight as to whether we are reaching particularly the underbanked, underserved communities. So have there been steps taken so that we will be able to get the granular information we need on the loans that have been made to evaluate how well we're reaching minority communities, how well we're reaching the underbanked communities in the not just the PPP program, but also the EIDL program? We had problems initially with the oversight by the executive branch because of the lack of access. You've already answered that you made full accessibility to the Inspector General and GAO in regards to the information that they need. But are we going to be able to have a better evaluation because of your ability to get information from the small businesses that are, we don't need to know the specific names, but we do need to know the demographics of the small businesses in order to be able to understand whether this program has really reached the communities that traditionally have been left out. I take it that'd be for Mr. Kelly, at least to start off with.
So yes, I think that it's a complicated issue because, for example, in the lending programs, we're dependent upon receiving information, for example, voluntarily and self-reported data for demographic information. And for example, as you know, the colleagues on the banking committee know as well that banks are quite correctly, not told to gather information commercially on race and ethnicity, for example. And so we have problems, therefore, in terms of the sources of data. And then that compounds our ability to isolate these things. I think there's a silver lining from the PPP where James's EIDL Advance program showed better reporting and better demographic outcomes to underserved communities than, for example, the first couple phases of PPP. We are better equipped to do things with place-based, so low to moderate income, rural, because we can validate zip codes and geomap those from a technology perspective. But we could also, as an agency, start to look at software tools that are out there that can provide indicators of the nature of the business owner so that we can use those to make better decisions about how these things are happening. And then we should also be mindful that we need to do more outreach. I think Senator Markey's question was spot on. And, what are we doing in the Boston way from New England to get to the communities that most need our help? And I know Administrator Guzman is focused on that through the Community Navigators program, and that was a priority of hers when she served the state of California. So yes to data sharing, yes to attacking this problem about sources and uses so we can make more informed choices to attack the problems that Senator Booker underscored as well.
I'm going to get to the Community Navigator program in one moment. But I just really want you, I think you do understand this, but there is bipartisan interest in the Senate. There is clear interest, not just in this committee, but in the Banking Committee, that we get the information we need in order to properly evaluate how this program has worked and reached the most vulnerable communities. So if you run into obstacles in being able to evaluate who's getting these loans, let us know about it and let's see whether we can't remove those obstacles. But we would like you to be aggressive in requesting that information where you can so that we can have that in. We had a hard time, not just the Senate, not just the House, but the Inspector General and GAO in getting information necessary in order to evaluate the program in the previous administration. So we would hope that you would be innovative in getting us the information so that we can make an honest assessment of how well we've done in reaching the underserved communities. We knew we were going to have a challenge when we were dealing with the banking community with those that didn't have traditional banking arrangements. We knew that, but it took us a long time to be able to assess that information, and we didn't have the efforts made initially to get the underbanked community access to financial institutions. So that's all we're asking, is that you make that information available. On the Community Navigator, and I recognize we don't have on this panel those that are going to be directly responsible. I accept that. And I'm a supporter of the Community Navigator program. But we must now understand that by the time this gets implemented, the PPP program will have been most likely completed by then. The EIDL program, of course, still be around. We recognize that. The EIDL Advanced program might be pretty well spoken for by that period of time. And the question is, how do you integrate this pilot program on navigators with the resource partners that are there on a more permanent basis? And how do you enter into arrangements with the nonprofit community located within the underserved community so you have the direct contacts to those in the community that are trusted in the community? So how do you use the existing resource partners? How do you use state and local government? How do you use nonprofits within targeted communities to best utilize the resources of navigators to access not just the special COVID-19 programs that were stood up, but the traditional tools within the SBA to make sure that they are available, which they have not been in the underserved communities in adequate numbers. And that'll make for a discussion for another day. but it's certainly relevant to what we were talking about today. And I know this committee is going to be very interested in hearing from the administrator as to how the Navigator program is helping us reach the underserved communities.
Senator Cardin, I would just add that an important innovation that the Senate and the House did on ARP was asking for self-certification for social and economically disadvantaged individuals in order to access prioritization. So that change is innovative because that will help incentivize self-reporting, which should give us better data.
Great. Glad to hear that. And at all times, and we know that the relationship with the Inspector General and GAO is certainly much more positive and productive than we saw on the initial rollout of the COVID package on PPP. But we do welcome the recommendations of the Inspector General and GAO as to how we can make this more effective in reaching traditionally underserved communities. And we know that you have been dealing with the waste, fraud, and abuse. We recognize that's a broad category, and we recognize that's still a work in progress. And we welcome your recommendations, so we know that the SBA has been very open to those recommendations. So we hope you'll keep us informed on the recommendations that are made and the reactions from the SBA and from Congress as we go through our oversight function and try to refine the current tools under the SBA to be more effective in carrying out their mission. That's an open invitation at any time to please feel free to contact us if we can be helpful or if there are additional tools you need from Congress. The committee will keep the record open for 2 weeks for questions that may be asked by members of the committee. We would ask the witnesses to try to respond to those questions as promptly as possible. And if there is no further comments by any of the 4 panelists, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.